Hi, nice to be here. I tell you, it feels a little bit, as you kind of go outside, it's, for those who read Asimov, which I'm sure you all do, like kind of introduction to the first foundation of all the technology and how cool it is, and I'm going to re-engineer everyone. Well, I guess what we do is the other bit. For those who have read Asimov, we do the sort of second foundation. It's a risky parallel perhaps to make, but to think about psychology and human behavior. And that's what we've been doing since 2010 in Downing Street, and now the Behavioural Insights team has turned into a social purpose company co-owned by government and working in many other countries too. So we do lots of different areas. We do all kinds of, how can you boost growth? How can you get people back to work faster? Get them to pay their taxes on time. A whole range of things, education, etc. Today, of course, I'll just talk about health. I'll give you a few quick examples and then go slightly broader about the kind of methods that we use. You can read about us. We put it in public domain. You can even read a book, Inside the Nudge Unit, which tells you about what we do, and so on. So we think an important principle is also for us to be very open about it. If governments want to use these kind of techniques, some people worry about it in the media and elsewhere. So I think a straightforward thing is let's be open about what it is we do, and then most people react pretty positively. Okay, so in health, here's just some very simple kind of questions. And you'll see we're interested in some ways, really super low tech, you might think, about human behavior. But, how many face-to-face contacts happened in the NHS, National Health Service today? Probably 700,000, that sort of number, if you remember. How many letters? We still send letters in health, actually, let alone texts and other things, and large volumes and so on. And the key question about all these sorts of things is, were they an opportunity to actually change and shape human behavior in important ways? And a really important thing to bear in mind, particularly as you start thinking about precision medicine and all these other things, is a huge amount of the variance in health outcomes is actually to do with behavior. We all kind of know that, right? It's we didn't exercise enough, or we're eating the wrong food, or actually we should be just nicer to each other because of social contacts, incredibly powerful force for good. And how can you influence and affect these other aspects where actually most of the variance lies? Not only in industrialized nations, but also, in fact, across the world. So I'll just show you a couple of quick examples, which are very sort of low-tech, simple illustrations, talk about a slightly broader public health issue, and then conclude with a sort of wider range using a framework we sometimes employ. So kind of examples, what I mean by low-tech is things that sort of matter quite a lot in the healthcare system. All these people people miss appointments. Actually, huge numbers of people miss their appointments, and then you have surplus capacity you're not using well, at the same time as the systems struggle. I think you've had Sally Davis. Did you have Sally Davis? Didn't you? Yeah, indeed. Talking, I assume, about lots of things, but probably including antimicrobial resistance. In fact, she might have used as an example. It's possible. I don't know. It's a major issue in terms of overprescription, etc. What you can do about it. Changing, of course, not just the public behaviour, but in this case, changing the behaviour of professionals themselves, medics. Long waiting times, or I'll talk about a public health issue. So here's a nice simple example. So I mentioned quite a lot of people turn out to miss appointments. About 1 in 10 hospital appointments get missed. Increasingly, hospitals, actually not all, but start to do this really low-tech thing. A good idea. They send people a little text, and it reminds them that you have an appointment. Whoa. And this is the date of it. Ideally, it'll even tell you as well. But a very simple phenomenon which you'll be familiar with in the world of digital, A/B formatting, be amazed how much in conventional public services people don't actually think about, well, what is the best message? What would be the best text, right? So the kind of thing we will do sometimes is just test, well, what would it be, including using a bit of known behavioral science. So I'll just show you some examples in a minute. So the baseline condition is you just send someone a text and it just says, this is when your appointment is, please let us know if you can't make it, right? And it turns out that, I think we should have the graph here. There's the standard. That's how many people miss their appointment. Typically 10, 11, 12%. That's the sort of number who don't turn up. Well, a really simple addition would be, why don't you add the phone number of who you might call on the text? So a simple variant would be to say, make it easy, we would say, this is when your appointment is. Please just give us a call if you can't make it. And there's the number, right? Does that make a difference? Actually, well, it does help a little bit. Another one of the powers, we'll come back to it later, is we're incredibly influenced by what other people are doing, right? In most, be it dropping litter or all kind of areas, it depends on did other people drop litter. So if we just say, well, 9 out of 10 people do turn up. We found that a very effective message in other areas. Some of you may have received the letter from Her Majesty's Revenue Service saying 9 out of 10 people pay their tax on time. Turns out it significantly increases the payment rate on those who were late otherwise. Well, it works a bit. In this case, not particularly well. We also then just tested a particular variant, which is why don't we just tell people what is the cost of an appointment? Now, of course, in the National Health Service, you don't pay that. But just adding on to the text, please let us know if you can't make it. It costs the NHS. In fact, we use a very specific number. The actual thing, it's like £160 in this particular case. Does that work? Yeah, it's highly significant. So to give you a sort of sense of the scale of that sort of effect, what does that mean across a system? That's basically just in this one location, it was trial, about 6,000 appointments, about 400,000 across the system. So that's quite a lot of missed appointments. Now, of course, you try and build it into a system, but often you can't do it perfectly. Just, get the messaging right. It's pretty simple, you might think. Here's another example. Again, I think it's possible Sally talked about this. Hopefully she didn't, but anyway, so Sally was involved in this trial. One of the interesting questions is, what can you do about overprescription of antibiotics? Now, in this case, instead of the public, you're actually thinking about the professionals who are, not so straightforward to influence their behavior, perhaps. They're very highly trained, etc. It turns out there's quite a lot of variation, for example, across GPs, general practitioners in the UK, in terms of how many antibiotics they prescribe. Now, sometimes that, of course, reflects a population, older patients, etc., but a lot of it seems to be something else. In fact, there's lots of work about when it's true for lots of professionals, be it judges or whatever. Time of day influences, for example, whether they'll give you a pill or not, or whether they give you a sentence or set you free or not. So generally, for example, if you want a good outcome, go after lunch. Good time. Anyway, but in general, can we influence it? So the department were very keen, in fact, the overall target to reduce, by a certain percentage, the level of antibiotics being prescribed. And they decided, I'm going to show you this fantastic campaign, and they had these big posters with someone sticking their tongue out saying an unpleasant fact you might find hard to swallow about antibiotics, and these leaflets and so on, this big campaign. We managed to get them to do it as a randomized controlled trial, test it. It turns out it does nothing at all. It doesn't do anything at all. These kind of posters you see in waiting rooms or whatever. So we want to try a different thing, which is we've got quite a lot of data. So we identify the 20% of GPs who prescribe the most antibiotics, right? And then what we do is it's a randomized controlled trial. We split them in two halves, and then we write to half of them. And actually, we have Sally Davis's name on the end, because it seemed like a good messenger, we would say. And we just tell them this is true. Just by the way, you might want to know that you prescribe more than 80% of other practitioner. Of course, it might be that you've got very sick patients. And here's, by the way, a few simple things you might want to think about. So when Greg comes in and he says, I'm really sick, can you give me some pills? And you might want to say, well, we'll write you this prescription, and if you don't feel better, then use it, but it's for a day or two away. Anyway, so would it make a difference? So we write one letter only to these GPs. And so you see the kind of thing it's got in it. You probably can't read it, but it's stuff like, majority of practices in London prescribe fewer antibiotics per head than yours, so it's social norms, and then it gives you specific actions, etc. So it's pretty low tech. We're literally writing a letter. So I'll show you the results. So we start, this is before you get very big seasonal variations, as you might imagine. Randomized controlled trial, half of these GPs being given a letter, half not. So what do we see? There's the control group, the big seasonal variation coming in there. This is the treatment group, and look at this over 6 months, and they get one letter. This is what happens. Now, that might not look like a big effect, but it's actually pretty stomping. It's about 4% reduction, and these are the guys who are prescribing the most amount. Just to make sure, because what we then do is we then send the letter to the other half of the GPs who didn't get it, and then just to see, and there you see the reconvergence of the rates. So even highly trained doctors are influenced by the same kinds of behavioral forces. Look at your peers, etc. This is more or less, by the way, the entire target for the NHS for the year was delivered by sending this letter, pretty much. Okay, and the effect sizes, blah, 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 there you go. Okay, and so now I'm going to just talk about a slightly more diffuse thing. So I started with my main point, which was that a lot of health issues aren't to do with the stuff that happens in medical health contexts. It's the stuff we're all doing all the time. It's our own behavior, right? Good example being what are we eating, drinking, etc. And so I thought I'd just mention a bit of background about this particular issue, which we've been wrestling with in many countries, certainly both sides of the Atlantic, which is what can you do to shift consumption habits? So I'll just show you a kind of one little tiny experiment, and I'll explain a bigger context to it. So this was a trial actually we did in Australia, and the question was just, in fact, it's a classic. It is literally in some ways the canonical nudge, which is so-called choice architecture, right? So when you go to the canteen, what's in front of you? Is it the salad, right, first of all, or is it the chips, right? French fries, sorry, otherwise would say. So we did this, and of course we appropriately did this in a medical setting. It'd be a nice sort of context. We did a very big hospital. And so the idea was, look, let's not change anything other than just make the unhealthiest drinks slightly harder to reach. We didn't even take them up. They're just a bit harder. They're a little bit out of reach, et cetera, et cetera. And, would it make a difference? The guys running this big central kind of canteen said, it's a pain in the arse, and everybody's going to complain, and so on, and so on, and so on. Does it make a difference? I'll just show you what it does, actually. So the red line, this is that's the unhealthiest, the high sugar drinks. Basically, it's a massive reduction in their consumption, and what you see is this increase in the other kinds of drinks. The amber and the green is basically water, right? It's absolutely a massive effect size. One of the things they were really worried about, by the way, is that everybody would be complaining. They did a survey in the sites to see how many people objected. Well, forget objected. It's about 1 in 100 people even notice that you've moved the drink position. Because one of the characteristics about a lot of consumption, particularly eating, is so-called mindless. You're literally not aware of what you're eating. And in fact, the effects are so large that official statistics have to be wrong about how much we eat by about 40%. Right? So people, you are literally, maybe you guys are all exceptional, you look thin and healthy, but people are interested, particularly if you're watching TV actually, people literally don't know what did happen to all that food that was there an hour ago. Even in formal surveys, when you ask people to report what they eat, they just literally don't know what they've eaten. So, by the way, you might say, well, does it persist? Well, look, here, I'll show you that there's the data as it carries on. And you can see it is persistent. Of course, the other concern, what is it doing for sales? Oh, my goodness. Well, actually, it doesn't really do anything. If anything, they drift up over time. So what does it do in this particular case? Where can you go with it? It's very hard to move whole population. In this case, people aren't very attentive to it. So what do we move in this case? It takes us to a very different kind of solution, which is we want to really drive reformulation. Because most people don't look at the labeling, etc. So I'll just show you one last graph on this, which is, this is carbonated drinks. I'm sure you're very expert. It shows you how much sugar there is in different carbonated drinks. I don't think I've got lasers, I can't actually point. But anyway, just, I don't know, if you're a lemonade connoisseur, look at 7-Up at the top. There we go. And if you scan down, there is Sprite. Look at where Sprite is. Right? Whoa. Well, there's Tango, pretty good up there, as opposed to Fanta, etc., etc. By the way, look at Tesco lemonade, doing really very well. These have quite big differences in sugar, and people are completely inattentive to it. So the reason why in the UK, you're not interested in what we're doing, is we're introducing a sugar tax. But of course, the reason why we're doing it is partly because people's behaviour is passive, is we're designing a 2-level tax because we're driving reformulation by, in fact, as the Chancellor mentioned this week, it's already happening. We haven't even introduced the tax, but anticipatory, there's reformulation, massive reformulation occurring of drinks, which is taking sugar out, which most people are never going to notice. These kind of things, they're not quite as exciting as having, CRISPR and brain scan or whatever, but they are actually extremely impactful in terms of our health and our behavior. So my just kind of last slide really concludes. What would you do and what's our suggestion? You might think about our low-tech thinking about human beings. We sometimes use a very simple mnemonic. Healthcare, as many other areas, should go east. And east is a mnemonic. If you want to affect human behavior, easy, attractive, social timing. And just to conclude, I'll just quickly, so we do literally hundreds of these trials in different areas. I'll just give you a few other quick examples to drive home the point. Am I all right for another minute or two? Yes, okay. So, easy. You don't need a PhD from Cambridge, actually. It turns out, if you want to affect human behavior, be obsessively concerned about frictional forces, right? And what can you do? I'll give you an example, for a real-world example, which is the suicide rate in Britain dropped by about 20 to 25% in the late 1950s to 60s. It dropped for 7 years in a row, right? Don't you know this? For both men and women. And the reason why? It was actually the discovery of North Sea oil. That's what drove down suicide. It wasn't free love, I'm afraid. It wasn't all that other nice stuff going on. It was North Sea oil. And why did it do that? It's because when North Sea oil came on stream, it brought with it so-called natural gas. Why does that affect the suicide rate? Because one of the ways that people often would kill themselves, they would put their head in the oven. And it used to kill you in the early 1950s because gas was derived from coal, which had lots of carbon monoxide. Along comes North Sea oil. It's got less carbon monoxide in the gas. So, it turns out it's a little bit harder to kill yourself. And if you track it, you see all these people who are going to kill themselves, basically, try head in the oven, doesn't really work. Oh, all right, well, I'll go on with my life then. So if frictional factors are important for the most important decision in your life, I assure you they're important for all the other things that influence your health and everything else. Okay, so easy, incredibly important. Other kinds of examples, you might imagine. Attractive, how can you make it attractive? How can you create a substitution? So if you want people to turn up to have their cancer screening, right, this is a pretty important kind of issue. Well, actually, it might turn out the way in which you write the letter, in fact, turns out to be incredibly consequential. Do you offer to put someone, come along for screening, win, we'll put you into a lottery to win an iPad to give to, for breast cancer as an example, for an important woman to you in your life. Yeah, does it drive? Yes, it does. It drives up substantially and is highly cost effective in terms of getting people to have screens. So yes, let's have some fantastic technology and better scanning, but actually just think about how you can make it attractive for people to turn up. Even things like, of course, electronic cigarettes. We intervened in number 10 in the nudge unit around making them available. We should actually make them widely available because they're an easy and attractive route to essentially step down from smoking. And indeed, e-cigarettes are now the dominant route through quitting smoking in the UK. Social. I already showed you a social example, but yes, we are incredibly influenced by what everybody else is doing. So another good piece of kit, I actually haven't. Only people in London doesn't have a Fitbit, it would seem. But it turns out that they often don't work very well behaviorally. But if you adjust them by putting people into groups of people, we have a shared target, even if you're strangers, becomes highly effective at moving up activity levels, and particularly for those who are the least active, right? So add that in that sort of way. And timely, this is the last thing we just mentioned. It really matters when you do things with human beings, right? When are they attuned? That's why, infamous example, like Target wants to know if you're going to have a baby, right? Because it's going to disrupt your life, and then you can switch products, consumers, etc. And that's why we're going to look at your consumption patterns. It's true for lots of areas, be it a GP, when they make a recommendation, we just ran a trial, just changing the choice architecture very slightly when the doctor is saying which hospital you go to, which gives them a prompt in that moment about the waiting list for that versus other hospitals, and leads to a 38% shift in who they refer you to, which hospitals, right? So very big effects. So I can conclude there. I hope I've given you some sense, alongside the super cool, super techie things you do, there's something really interesting about human behavior, about which we should also be thinking, which is extremely consequential, and particularly in relation to things like health. Thank you.
Thank you.